there are quite a few elements and moving parts to this reflection, but I feel like it's a good idea to kind of throw everything into the proverbial cauldron and get all of the ideas into the same space and kind of condense and organize them, because then it means I'm able to pull out particular strands later on and expand on those as more detail emerges, and as that kind of continues as a conversation or dialogue, if there are any contributions or thoughts that people want to engage with. And I've been thinking about colloquial language and accent and identity communicated through connection to place, and the way that that shapes and informs your voice use, you know, your speech patterns, your vocabulary, your intonation, and also, colloquial phrases or even catchphrases, I want to say, because I always find it difficult to answer with certainty or with a kind of neat answer, you know, where are you from? Because there are various influences that I would say shape my identity in terms of my sense of place, and thinking about if I'm containing that within my homeland context of Scotland, then I grew up in Murrayshire, so the northeast. I didn't have any familial connections up there, but I was immersed in the Doric. I was immersed in that northeast inflection and that sound not in the home, but in my learning environment, my kind of social environments, and in the community, but also because of that particular place in the world with lots of other influences of different communities coming to live in that space as well. It wasn't just a Doric sound, there were lots of other elements coming into the sonic landscape, shall we say, and then the home environment having a different reference point. And so there are still aspects of those sounds that kind of come through for me and shape, I suppose, my speech patterns, my quality of enunciation. And then I notice that it will change if I am speaking with somebody from the northeast. You tune in, you assimilate. And I think this is connected to this social, we have an inherent desire to want to be understood and be in resonance and in harmony with other people socially. So there's that affinity there. There's a kind of a shared cultural reference point which helps facilitate that. But then also it's a sound, it's a frequency that you recognize and that's familiar to you. So it's easy to kind of flip that switch, which happens in quite an unconscious way. But for sure, the longer that maybe I would spend in somebody's company with those inflections, the more I would start to kind of pick up and then kind of come back into a way of communicating that was evocative of how I might have used my voice when I was at school. And then now the situation I'm in is that the majority of my time is kind of West Coast centred and kind of city centric in Glasgow. And my dad is originally from Glasgow. And I've been around Glasgow people all my life. There's always been somebody, because it's quite a big place. So, and also I've been around different people from different pockets who have quite distinctly, pointedly different accents. And something so interesting about the social relationship of Glasgow people with vocal expression is that there's a strong element of play and kind of like riffing on a theme. So there might be a communication style that people use in a professional space or speaking to other people, from a completely different background and reference point. But if you throw together a group of Glasgow people, there's a kind of mimicry, there's a kind of a playfulness with sound where things just become more Ouija, they become more guttural, and there's that like social bonding, which happens around the sound piece. This happens obviously within all different kinds of cultural contexts and linguistic contexts, but I can only truly speak to this one because it's obviously something that I notice in terms of when I shift into that, because I do have other sonic reference points, that have shaped and influenced me. And yeah, so I could use an example of interacting with someone from the north, who's, easily 40 years my senior, and how there's a shift in gears in the way that I might use my voice, which is kind of starting to emulate elements of the way that they are using their voice. And it's kind of this subconscious kind of banter and energy exchange that's going on, but it's facilitated through this shared experience of sound. And I think a great example also of this would be someone that uses Scots lead much more naturally in their day-to-day speech. That would be something I would again be able to kind of tune into or switch on. It's not to say I don't use Scots words in my day-to-day, but not to the same extent, perhaps, as older folk who are actually using words that are really not in the common lexicon now for people of my age, because unfortunately, the less these things are used, the more easily it's not that they die out per se, they still exist, but they're not so then present in a kind of lived oral tradition experience. So that is one thread that is interesting. And then I was also thinking about it. What's prompted this today is, being in my locale and having then a language of a locale which reflects your neighbourhood and the kind of people that you're around, and how actually that is a really, really interesting way to observe shifts and changes in your patterns and style of communication. Because especially if you live in a place where there's like a real amalgamation of people, there is a sort of a way that all of these sounds and aspects mix together, and it kind of creates a meta language, or a kind of, not necessarily language is maybe not the right word, but a kind of meta sound or frequency that, that becomes a kind of main channel where all these other influences can plug into. but somehow it's an adaptive, function, so that it makes it easier for people that don't have the same reference points or mother tongue to be able to kind of contribute something to the melting pot, but then there will be a strong inflection or quality, sonically speaking, of that origin place or that particular neighborhood or environment. So that one's interesting. And I noticed today that I'd asked somebody how they were doing, and I'd said, "How are your energies?" as in plural. And I thought, oh, that's interesting that I've used that in that way. And I think on the one hand, it reflects a more embodied integration of a 5 elements perspective, and also parts theory as well, and this idea of voice not being singular, but that there are many voices, there are many identities, there are many characters, there are many archetypes. So this kind of plurality fits into a holistic and multifaceted, multidimensional expression or idea of what voice is. So then that kind of got me thinking about, okay, that maybe speaks to a worldview lens that acknowledges more than one or a whole person perspective, and also somehow creates more of an openness in terms of what you're actually asking. It's like, it's not just how are you, it's like how are all of your how are all of your parts and all of your elements, if you like. And then I was thinking about also how that related to then a quality of colloquial language, and the kind of different variations of that there are within a kind of Glasgow context. So how are your energies? It is definitely like how is it going? What have you been doing? Like, these are all ways of asking how you are, but they're all using kind of active verbs, doing words, which is also interesting because it kind of speaks to this sense of you're checking in a way that is acknowledging the fact that a lived experience of wellness, or how you actually feel, is transient and always changing and shifting and moving. And I think the quality of intention and the way that you would propose this kind of check-in, and I'm using that word colloquial because it's kind of got this like easygoing, friendly, relaxed, informal kind of energy about it, that's just very kind of chilled out. But actually, that is that's the kind of friendliness or a kind of an inherent style of communication that I think exists within a Glaswegian context socially. But then also the fact that these expressions or check-ins of, like, how are you, are using these like active doing words, is maybe also speaking to the busyness and the external environment, the actual space where there's always something going on. There's always a big racket and a clatter, and there's always a hustle and bustle. So there's that kind of, again, it's bringing in a piece of cultural reference point to the choice of word that is speaking to a shared experience of environment, an environment being fast-paced and changing, because you know as well as anybody else, you could bump into multiple people at different points in the day on the street, for example, and your way of responding to them and how's it going, it will be different each time, because you're in motion, you're going and you're traversing a landscape of emotion, and you're traversing a landscape where there are different stimulations and triggers and things going on. So your experience is like, you know, moving in this kind of way. So yeah, I'm gonna have to get out the pen and paper and think about more kind of Glasgow isms or phrases that are like different ways of saying yeah, like how's it going? What's happening? It's like there is a quality of action and movement in these kind of colloquial phrases. So aye, that kind of got the ball rolling for me, just thinking about that in relationship to place. And this has also probably been stirred up because of yesterday sitting in on an oral history interview skills training, and you know, being in a room with different people from different backgrounds, and you know, just getting that opportunity in a contained environment to hear different sounds and to think about, oh, like how do I relate to that sound? What part of that sound actually expresses or speaks to a part of my identity? So yes, there was somebody that was a northeast person there, and you know, immediately you're tuning in to that accent and that sound, and you're like, oh yeah, like I know that is within me. It's actually also from a kind of vocal development perspective, coming into like how we actually shape and create sound. It's like your internal landscape is, you are shaping sound and you're inside of sound and you are creating shapes in order to produce certain qualities. So this is why language, I think, is such an interesting entry point to explore vocalization and explore experimentation with sound. And if I come back to the research project that I did in 2019, a vocal journey in Mongolia, and I think about actually what my entry point into beginning to explore sonically, it had to start with language, because that was then actually about, okay, what is the kind of mechanical process here that I need to engage with in order to start making shapes that make the sounds that then inform how you approach a kind of musical exploration. So it's you're then kind of navigating new territory and externally and getting that auditory feedback, but you're also navigating new territory internally, because you're actually trying to situate and locate and find the space and the shape within yourself as to how that sound is actually created. So I think that is why language is fascinating. One of the reasons why it's fascinating to me, and also, yeah, because of having the musical ear and using that to advantage in terms of kind of navigating social environments where there are different people, and that it actually serves you so well to be able to have that flexibility and adaptability to how you use your voice and explore and create sound. And that there's nothing disingenuous about that, because mimicry is part of that reflex and part of how we actually learn language and part of how we actually build that relationship in a kind of paternal kin space as well, of being able to identify which sound is that of my family, of my clan. So there are so many elements there that they open up space for exploration in a way that feels really open and really curious. So yeah, as you can tell, it's kind of got me thinking, just from that one choice of word, it kind of sparked off this whole other process, and has created an avenue for me to consolidate, I guess, a few ideas or things that I've been swimming in and thinking about. But yeah, they all find a kind of common ground. So I will likely touch on this again, but those are today's thoughts, and please join in the conversation. Let me know what your background is, what languages you speak, and also which languages maybe allow you to express a certain facet of your identity that only that language can facilitate, or only that geographical place and that sound or that accent, that kind of sonic landscape, that it allows you to connect with a certain facet of your expression. It's fascinating. So I'd love to hear, and I hope everyone is keeping well.